The first meeting, a lesson in humility. Or so I thought. I still remember the way the afternoon light filtered through the half-drawn curtains of their small, weathered house, soft and golden, as if it were trying to soften the edges of everything inside. The moment I stepped over that creaky threshold, I could smell the faintest hint of old wood and lavender, the kind of scent that clings to places where time moves slower. My boyfriend Daniel had warned me that his parents were simple folks, but nothing prepared me for the way his father's calloused hands gripped mine a second too long, his eyes searching mine as if he were trying to memorize my face. His mother, wrapped in a faded cardigan with a threadbare hem, offered me a chipped teacup with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We don't get many visitors," she said, and I could hear the unspoken question hanging between us. "What do you want from our son?" I didn't hesitate. I sat on their sagging couch, the springs groaning under me, and I listened, really listened. His father talked about the factory job that had left his back permanently stiff, the way he'd worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. His mother's hands trembled slightly as she stirred sugar into my tea. Too much sugar, the way my own grandmother used to do. And she told me about the winters they'd spent with nothing but rice and beans. How she'd sewn her own clothes because store-bought was a luxury. I looked around at the peeling wallpaper, the television that looked older than I was, the single-family photo on the mantel, its edges curled with age, and something in my chest tightened because I recognized this. Not the exact struggles, no, but the quiet dignity of people who've been knocked down and still stand up straight. So I did what I always do when I see someone carrying a weight they shouldn't have to carry alone. I reached out. I brought groceries the next time I visited. Nothing extravagant, just fresh bread, real butter, the kind of small comforts that feel like love when money's tight. I stayed late to help his mother mend a torn hem on her favorite sweater, my fingers working carefully over the frayed edges while she told me stories about Daniel as a boy. I laughed when his father joked about his million-dollar ideas that never panned out, and I meant it. Because here's the thing about me, when I care all the way. And in that moment, I wanted them to know I wasn't just some girl dating their son. I was someone who saw them, who chose them. Little did I know, they weren't who they claimed to be. But that first day, I believed every word, and more than that, I wanted to believe. Because there's something sacred about the trust a parent places in you when they let you into their home, into their stories. I didn't know then that their humility was a performance, their struggles a carefully crafted lie. All I knew was the warmth of that teacup in my hands, the way his mother's voice cracked when she talked about the night Daniel was born, how his father's pride shone brighter than any wealth when he bragged about his son's first job. I thought I was building a bridge. Turns out I was walking into a trap. But here's what they didn't count on. I've been underestimated before, and every single time it's been their mistake, not mine. So let me ask you this. Have you ever given your heart to someone only to find out they were playing a game the whole time? Stay with me, because the way this unravels, it's going to change how you see everything. The stories that bound us, and the lies that almost broke me. There's something sacred about the first story someone trusts you with. The way their voice cracks on certain words. The way their hands tremble just slightly when they reach for a memory. His parents, they didn't just tell me about their hard times. They let me in, or so I thought. His father, a man with calloused hands and a laugh that sounded like gravel underfoot, leaned back in that worn-out armchair and told me about the winter of '98. "We lived on potatoes and salt for 3 weeks," he said, his fingers tracing the rim of his chipped coffee mug. "The furnace broke, and we burned old newspapers just to keep the kids from shivering." His wife, her name was Margaret, but she insisted I call her Maggie. nodded, her knitting needles clicking like a metronome to his pain. I sewed their school clothes from flour sacks, she murmured. The other mothers whispered, but I didn't care. My babies were warm. I remember the way my throat tightened. My own parents had struggled, late bills, secondhand everything, but this was survival. I looked at my boyfriend, sitting beside me on that sagging couch, and I swore I saw shame flicker in his eyes. Like he was afraid I'd judge them. Judge him. So I did the only thing I knew how. I reached for Maggie's hand and said, "You did what you had to. That's love." Her eyes welled up. His father cleared his throat, sudden and rough, like he was holding back something bigger than the story itself. That night, as I washed the dinner dishes, their only good plates, chipped at the edges, they told me about the factory that shut down, the car that died twice before they could afford to bury it, the way they'd stretch a single chicken into 4 meals. "You learn to make do," Maggie said, handing me a towel, "or you don't make it at all." I nodded, my chest aching with something like pride. These people were fighters, and I respected that more than any designer label or trust fund. But here's the thing about stories. They're only as true as the hands that shaped them. And I didn't know it yet, but those hands were holding more than they let on, much more. I'll tell you this. There's a special kind of betrayal in realizing the struggles you wept for were just props in someone else's test. But that's not the lesson here. The lesson? Real strength isn't in the money you hide or the games you play. It's in the love you give before you know if it'll be returned. And that's a legacy no bank account can buy. So ask yourself, when the world tries to make you small, will you shrink? Or will you stand tall enough to see the truth? Because the right people won't just see your worth. They'll fight to keep it. And that's when you'll know you've built something no lie can ever break. Weeks passed, and something inside me began to shift. At first, it was just a whisper, a quiet, nagging doubt that curled around my thoughts like smoke. I'd replay conversations in my head, their stories of hardship, so vivid, so convincing. The way his mother's hands trembled when she talked about skipping meals to pay bills. The way his father's voice cracked describing the winter they spent without heat. I had felt their pain. I had believed them. But belief, I was learning, is a fragile thing, especially when the cracks start to show. It started with small things. A throwaway comment about a vacation spot I'd never heard of, some exclusive island they'd always dreamed of visiting. But the way she said it wasn't wistful, it was familiar, like she'd already traced her fingers along its shores. Then there was the old family watch his father wore, the one he claimed was a hand-me-down from his grandfather. I didn't know much about watches, but I knew the weight of real gold, the way sapphire crystal caught the light. And I knew that men who'd spent decades pinching pennies didn't wear timepieces that cost more than my car. But the biggest hint, their reactions. The way his mother's smile faltered when I mentioned thrift stores, how her grip tightened around her teacup like she was holding back words. Or the time I jokingly said I'd never flown first class. His father's laugh was too quick, too forced. "Oh honey, you're not missing much." But his eyes, they darted to his wife, something unreadable passing between them. I told myself I was imagining things, that kindness shouldn't be suspicious. That love, real love, didn't keep score. Yet every night as I lay in bed, my mind became a detective, piecing together clues I'd dismissed. The modest house with its custom crown molding, the hand-me-down furniture that bore no scratches, no signs of age. The way they never asked for help, just hinted, like actors playing a role. And then there was the way my boyfriend's voice changed when he talked about them. A tension, a carefulness, like he was walking on glass. They're just private, he'd say. But private people don't flinch when you offer to split the check. I wanted to trust them. God, I wanted to. Because the alternative, that their struggles were a lie, that their kindness was a test, felt like a knife twisting in something sacred. Had I been a pawn in some cruel game? Was my compassion just another line item in their ledger of judgments? The worst part, I couldn't even confront them. Not yet. Because if I was wrong, I'd be the villain. The girl who assumed the worst about people who'd opened their home to her. And if I was right, then the people I'd defended, the family I'd almost loved, they were monsters in sheep's clothing. So I stayed silent. I played my part. But inside, the doubt had become a storm. And storms, as I'd soon learn, have a way of revealing what's hidden beneath the surface. The moment the mask slipped, I'll never forget the night the truth hit me like a freight train. It wasn't some grand revelation. It was a whisper, a slip of the tongue, a single careless detail that unraveled everything. My boyfriend's father had left his tablet open on the kitchen counter, the screen glowing with a property listing. Not just any property, a penthouse in Manhattan, the kind with floor-to-ceiling views of the skyline, listed under a shell company with his name buried in the fine print. My fingers trembled as I swiped through the photos, my stomach twisting. That modest, chipped coffee mug he'd sipped from earlier suddenly felt like a prop in some sick performance. Then came the texts. A notification popped up from a private banker. Confirmed wire transfer of $2.8 million to the Cayman account. My breath caught. The same man who'd struggled to pay for groceries last week had millions stashed offshore. The same woman who teared up over her old unreliable car had a garage full of vintage Porsches, registered under her maiden name. I sat there, frozen, the weight of their deception pressing down on me like a physical force. This wasn't just a lie, it was a test, a cruel, calculated game to see if I'd reveal myself as some gold-digging stereotype they'd already decided I was. Anger burned through me first, white-hot and consuming. How dare they? How dare they sit across from me at that dinner table, nodding along as I talked about my own struggles, my own hard-earned successes, while they wore their poverty like a costume. But beneath the anger was something worse, betrayal. Because this wasn't just about them, this was about him. My boyfriend. Had he known, had he let them do this to me? The thought made my hands shake. I loved him, or at least I thought I did. But love doesn't thrive in shadows. And right then, I realized I didn't even know if the man I was with was real, or just another layer of their performance. I spent that night pacing my apartment, my mind racing, every memory replayed through a new lens. Their humble home with its suspiciously high-end appliances. The way his mother's thrifted scarf was actually vintage Hermes. The times they'd accidentally left designer labels visible when they thought I wasn't looking. They'd been watching me, waiting for me to slip, to ask for money, to reveal my true colors. But here's the thing about tests. They don't just expose the person being tested, they expose the tester. And in that moment, I saw them for what they were. People so jaded by wealth, so terrified of being used, that they'd rather manipulate and humiliate than simply trust. I could have confronted them right then, screamed, stormed out, let their little scheme blow up in their faces. But something in me hardened. If they wanted a performance, fine, I'd give them one, but this time I would be the one pulling the strings. Now, I want you to ask yourself, what would you have done? Would you have walked away, fought back, or would you, like me, have looked in the mirror and seen not just anger, but opportunity? Because here's the truth about tests. They're only as powerful as you let them be. And I was done letting them define me. It was time to rewrite the script. A hash. There was a moment, one of those quiet, defining moments, where the air feels heavier and time slows down. when I stood in front of my closet, running my fingers over the fabrics of my life. The silk blouses, the tailored coats, the shoes that had carried me through boardrooms and celebrations. And then I closed my eyes and made my choice. If they wanted to play a game, I would play it better, but not for their money, not for their approval, for something far more valuable, the truth. I didn't just decide to act broke. I stripped away every layer of privilege they assumed I wore like armor. My wardrobe became a uniform of thrift store finds, faded jeans with threads pulling at the seams, sweaters peeled from too many washes, shoes scuffed enough to tell a story of struggle. I stopped wearing my watch, the one my grandfather left me, not because I feared they'd recognize its worth, but because I refused to let them see anything they could weaponize. My hair, usually sleek, I left loose or tied back in a messy knot, as if I no longer had the time or the care to tame it. Every detail was deliberate. Every change was a calculated step into the role they'd written for me. But it wasn't just about clothes. It was about the way I carried myself. I let my posture slump just enough to suggest exhaustion. My laughter grew quieter, my stories simpler. When they asked how work was, I'd sigh and shake my head. They let go of half my team. I'm barely scraping by. The words tasted bitter, but I swallowed them anyway. Because here's the thing about playing broke when you're not. It doesn't just humble you, it forces you to confront parts of yourself you've never had to acknowledge. The fear of judgment, the shame of pretending, the quiet rage of knowing you're being tested like some lab rat in a maze of their design. And yet, there was power in it. A strange, fierce kind of power. Because while they thought they were pulling the strings, I was the one holding the scissors. Every time I walked into their house in my new clothes, every time I politely declined their sudden offers of help with a tired smile, I saw the flicker in their eyes, confusion, doubt, the first cracks in their carefully constructed facade. They had expected me to break, to reveal my true self, the gold digger they'd imagined. Instead, they watched as I became someone they couldn't control, someone who didn't need their money because she didn't want it. This wasn't just a game anymore, it was a mirror. And every day I held it up a little higher, letting them see the reflection of their own hypocrisy staring back at them. I won't lie, there were nights I questioned myself. Nights I wondered if I was stooping to their level. But then I'd remember the way his mother had accidentally spilled wine on my coat the first time I wore something nice. The way his father had chuckled about kids these days, always wanting handouts. And I'd know this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the dignity they tried to strip from me. So here's what I need you to understand. When life hands you a test like this, you don't just pass it. You rewrite the questions. You turn their game into your lesson. And you'll walk away knowing that no matter what they throw at you, your worth was never defined by their wallet or their opinion. Now tell me, if someone tried to test you like this, what would your first move be? Because the way you answer that says everything about who you are and who you're willing to become. There's a quiet power in watching someone's mask slip, especially when they never expected you to notice. At first, my interactions with my boyfriend's parents were warm, almost naive. I brought homemade meals to their modest home, offered to help with bills they claimed were piling up, and listened patiently to their stories of struggle. My kindness wasn't performative, it was genuine. I believed in treating people with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. But when I discovered the truth that their worn-out sweaters were designer, that their struggling business was a multi-million-dollar empire, I realized their poverty was just another kind of wealth, the kind that buys control. So I changed, not out of bitterness, but strategy. My laughter grew softer, my posture less eager, Where I once arrived with groceries, I now showed up empty-handed, my clothes plain, my excuses about work more frequent. Oh, I can't afford that, I'd say with a shrug, watching their faces twitch. The shift wasn't just in what I said, it was in what I didn't. No more stories about my own successes. No more offers to pay, just silence. A mirror held up to their hypocrisy. And oh, how they squirmed. The meetings became a chess game. Before they'd lean back in their chairs, smug in their secret superiority. Now they leaned forward, eyes darting for cracks in my facade. Are you sure you're okay? His mother asked once, her voice laced with false concern. I smiled faintly. I'll manage. The irony was delicious. They'd spent weeks testing me. Now they were the ones scrambling, their carefully constructed narrative unraveling, because I'd stopped playing my assigned role. This wasn't just about outsmarting them, it was about reclaiming the power they tried to strip from me. Every polite decline, every I can was a brick in the wall between us, a wall they built, but I controlled. And as their panic grew, so did my resolve. Because here's the truth. When you've been underestimated, the greatest revenge isn't anger, it's clarity. It's watching them realize too late that they misjudged you and that the game was never theirs to win. So ask yourself, when life tests you, do you crumble or do you turn the tables? Because the legacy you build isn't just about wealth or status, it's about the moments you choose to stand tall, even when the world expects you to bow. And trust me, that is the kind of richness no amount of money can buy. The phone calls started like a slow drip, hesitant at first, almost shy. His mother's voice, once laced with that thinly veiled condescension, now trembled with something else. Sweetheart, we were just thinking about you. She'd begin, her words stretching out like she was testing the weight of each syllable. I could practically hear the gears turning in her mind, the desperation clawing its way past years of practiced superiority. We know things have been difficult for you lately, and we just wanted to check in. Check in. The same woman who had smirked when I offered to help pay for groceries, who had exchanged glances with her husband when I mentioned my modest apartment, now she was checking in. Then came the offers. Oh, the offers. At first they were subtle. We have some connections, dear. Maybe we could put in a word for you somewhere. As if I hadn't heard them whispering about my lack of ambition just weeks before. But when I played my part to perfection, oh, that's so kind, but I couldn't possibly impose. Their tone shifted. The calls grew more frequent, their voices more urgent.
We insist, his father barked one evening. The same man who had once dismissed my career. That's cute.
Let us help you. We have resources. You don't have to struggle alone. The irony was so thick I could taste it. They had spent months pretending to be humble, judging me for my perceived lack of wealth, only to now beg me to take theirs. And the texts. Oh, the texts were my favorite. We found a job listing that might be perfect for you, followed by a link to an entry-level position at a company they just so happened to own. We'd love to have you over for dinner. No pressure, just family. Family. The word stung, coming from people who had treated me like an experiment. I'd smile at my phone, typing back polite declines, watching their panic escalate. They had wanted to test my character, but in their frenzy they had exposed their own. The hollow pride, the performative generosity, the way their kindness only extended as far as their control. I won't lie, there were moments it hurt, not because I needed their money or their approval, but because it was a reminder of how little they truly saw me. But here's what they didn't count on. I had already won. Their game was built on the assumption that I was playing for their wealth. But I wasn't playing at all. I was simply holding up a mirror. And the reflection, it terrified them. There's a moment in every relationship where the cracks in the foundation don't just show, they scream. And for us, that moment came when my boyfriend looked at me across his childhood kitchen table, his father's laughter still ringing in the air after another backhanded comment about my thrift store sweater. And I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Shame. Not for me, for them. That was the night the silence between us became its own kind of language. He didn't say it at first. Men like him raised on quiet privilege and the unspoken rule that family is sacred don't.
But I felt it in the way his hand tightened around mine under the table when his mother joked about how lucky he was to have found someone so resourceful. I saw it in the way his jaw clenched when his father slid that check across the table toward me, disguised as a loan for my sudden unemployment, his voice dripping with false generosity. And later, when we were alone, I heard it in the way his breath hitched when he finally whispered, "I didn't know they'd go this far." That was the thing about him, he knew. Not the extent of their wealth, not the depth of their manipulation, but he knew the kind of people they were. The kind who saw love as a transaction, trust as a test, and for the first time he was forced to see it through my eyes. We spent nights tangled in sheets and harder conversations, his voice raw with conflict. "I hate that they're doing this to you," he'd say, "but then I hate that I didn't stop it sooner." There was guilt there, thick and suffocating, because part of him had always suspected this was how they'd react to someone like me, someone who didn't come with a trust fund or a family name. Someone who loved their son despite them, not because of them. The worst part, watching him torn between loyalty and love. He'd defend me in heated phone calls, then hang up and stare at the wall like he'd betrayed some unspoken code. "What if they're right?" he asked once, voice barely above a whisper. "What if you do deserve better than this?" And that was the knife twist, because in that moment it wasn't about his parents or their money or their cruel little games. It was about us, about whether we were strong enough to survive the wreckage of his family's making. I'll never forget the night he broke, not with tears but with a quiet, terrifying calm. "I chose you," he said, like it was a confession, "and I'll keep choosing you."
But God, I'm so sorry you have to see the side of me, the side that's still afraid of them. That was the real test, wasn't it? Not their wealth or their schemes, but whether we could build something real from the ruins of his family's dysfunction. Here's what I know now. Love isn't just about standing together when the world is kind. It's about looking at each other in the mess, in the doubt, in the ugly parts of loyalty, and saying, I'm still here. And if you're reading this, if you've ever been made to feel small by people who think money makes them gods, listen to me. The right love won't just see you, it will fight for you, even when the fight is against blood, even when it costs everything. That's how you know it's real. Now ask yourself, what's your breaking point? And when you hit it, who's going to be there to help you rise? There were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind a storm of questions I couldn't silence. Was I the villain here? The thought clawed at me, relentless. Because what kind of person tests people like this? What kind of person sees kindness and assumes it's a performance? And yet, what kind of person plays along with the game, knowing full well the pain it could cause? The doubt coiled around my ribs, squeezing until I could barely breathe. I'd replay every interaction, every shared meal where I'd offered to help, every time I'd laughed at their stories of struggle, wondering if my silence made me complicit in something ugly. Then there were the moments when anger burned through the doubt like wildfire. I'd remember the way his mother's eyes had flicked over my thrifted sweater, the way his father had chuckled about people who spend money they don't have, while I sat there, nodding like I understood. The condescension wasn't subtle, it was a slow, deliberate unraveling, designed to make me feel small. And for a while it worked. I started questioning my own worth. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I'm not enough. Those whispers became a chorus. Loudest in the quiet hours, when my boyfriend wasn't there to remind me of the truth, their game wasn't about me. It was about them, but here's the thing about doubt. It's also a mirror. And in those sleepless nights, I began to see myself more clearly than ever. I saw the girl who'd been taught to shrink, to apologize for existing, to prove her worth in rooms that never intended to welcome her. And I saw the woman she was becoming, one who refused to let someone else's insecurity dictate her story. The conflict wasn't just about them. It was about me deciding, once and for all, that I wouldn't let anyone's test define my value. I'll admit, there were times I wanted to walk away, not just from them, but from the entire charade, to call my boyfriend and say, I can't do this anymore. But then I think about the version of me who'd let them win, the one who'd carry this doubt like a shadow for the rest of her life. And I realized resilience isn't about never faltering. It's about looking your fears in the eye and saying, not today. It's about turning their weapons, their judgments, their tests into the very tools that forge you stronger. So, yes, I played their game, but I played it on my terms, and in doing so, I didn't just expose their hypocrisy. I reclaimed my power, because the real legacy of this mess isn't about who was right or wrong. It's about the unshakable truth I carved into my bones. No one gets to decide who you are but you. And if you're standing in a room where people are waiting for you to fail, darling, that's not a test, that's a stage. Now go show them how it's done.
Hashut.
There was a moment, one of those quiet, heavy moments, where the air feels thick with everything unsaid, when I realized I couldn't let this go on any longer. It wasn't just about the lies, or the tests, or even the way they'd whispered about me, like I was some gold digger lurking in the shadows. It was about the way their game had started to warp me. I caught myself hesitating before laughing too loud, second-guessing every kind word, wondering if my own honesty was just another performance. That's when the fear set in. Not the kind that makes your hands shake, but the deep, gnawing kind. The fear that if I didn't speak up, I'd lose something far worse than their approval. I'd lose myself. I remember standing in front of the mirror that morning, practicing the words like a script. I know what you did. Why did you pretend? Did you ever actually see me? Each phrase tasted bitter, because the truth was, I didn't just want answers, I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd done. But doubt crept in like a thief. What if I'm overreacting? What if they twist this into proof that I'm unstable, that I'm the problem? My reflection stared back, and for the first time, I saw the exhaustion in my own eyes. The kind that comes from carrying a secret war. That's when I knew silence wasn't protection. It was surrender. So I made a choice. Not out of anger, though God knows I had enough of that, but out of something far more dangerous to them, clarity. I called my boyfriend and told him we needed to talk to his parents. Together. No more games, no more masks. His voice cracked when he asked, Are you sure? And in that crack, I heard the echo of my own fear. But I was done letting fear write my story. I thought about every time I'd shrunk myself to fit into someone else's narrative. Every time I'd swallowed my truth to keep the peace. This wasn't just about them. It was about every version of me that had ever stayed quiet when she should have roared. When I walked into that room, I didn't bring accusations. I brought myself raw, unedited, and unafraid. And that, more than any words, was the confrontation. Because here's what they didn't understand. You can test someone's patience, their loyalty, even their love. But the moment you test their self-respect, you've already lost.
I looked at them, really looked at them, and I saw the panic flicker in their eyes. Not because I had caught them, but because they finally saw me. The woman who'd cooked in their kitchen, laughed at their jokes, and loved their son despite them. And in that second, the power shifted. I don't know what you're carrying right now. Maybe it's a betrayal that sits like a stone in your chest, or a truth you've been too afraid to name. But I need you to hear this. The moment you decide to stand in your own story, that is when the world has no choice but to listen. It won't be easy. Your voice might tremble, your hands might shake, but the right people, they won't flinch, they'll meet you there. And the wrong ones, well, let them panic. You're not here to perform for their approval. You're here to live. So ask yourself, what's the cost of staying silent? And is it worth your soul? Because mine wasn't. And I bet yours isn't either. The air in that grand, marble-floored foyer was thick with the kind of silence that comes right before an explosion. I stood there, my plain cotton dress, a deliberate contrast to the crystal chandeliers above, watching his mother's perfectly manicured fingers tighten around her pearl necklace. His father, usually so composed, had a vein pulsing in his temple. They had spent weeks playing their little game, testing me, mocking me in hushed tones they thought I couldn't hear. But now the tables had turned, and the panic in their eyes was sweeter than any revenge I'd ever imagined. You knew, his mother hissed, her voice trembling with the first real emotion I'd ever heard from her. Not the practiced warmth of their humble act, not the cold disdain when they thought I wasn't looking. This was raw, ugly fear. All this time you knew who we were, and you just played along. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled, slow and deliberate, and let the weight of my silence press down on them.
I knew, I said finally, my voice steady, that you were testing me. What I didn't know was whether you'd have the decency to admit it when I tested you back. His father scoffed, but it lacked his usual bite. This isn't a game, young lady. You've embarrassed us, embarrassed you. I laughed, and the sound echoed through the hollow grandeur of their mansion. You embarrassed yourselves. You built this elaborate lie, not just for me, but for your son, for each other. You pretended to be something you're not, all to see if I'd fail some moral litmus test you invented. But here's the thing about tests. When you design one, you'd better be ready to take it yourself. His mother's face crumpled. We were protecting our family. From me? I shot back, my voice rising now, the dam of my patience finally breaking. I cooked in your kitchen. I listened to your stories. I cared when you were too busy counting your money to notice. And when I realized the truth, I could have walked away. I could have exposed you to your son, to your friends, to the world. But I didn't. Because unlike you, I don't measure people by what they have. I measure them by what they do. The room seemed to shrink around us. His father's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. What do you want from us? He muttered. And for the first time, he sounded like a man, not a puppet master. I didn't want their money. I didn't want their apologies. I wanted them to see me, to see the woman they'd underestimated, the one who turned their own weapon against them and won. I want you to look at me, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. And remember this moment the next time you think you can judge someone's heart by their bank account. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was transformative. Because in that moment, they didn't just see me, they saw themselves. And that was the real victory. So here's what I need you to understand. When the world tries to shrink you, to test you, to make you prove your worth, you don't have to play by their rules. You rewrite them. You stand in your truth, unshaken, and you let them see what happens when they underestimate the fire inside you. Because that fire, that's not just yours. It's your legacy. And no one, not parents, not partners, not the world, gets to decide how bright you're allowed to burn. Now go and light it up. The aftermath, when the mask fell and the truth stood naked between us. There's a kind of silence that follows a storm, the air heavy with the weight of what's been said, the debris of lies scattered at our feet. That's where we found ourselves after the confrontation. Their faces, once twisted in smug certainty, now bore the cracks of something deeper. Shame, maybe, or the dawning horror of their own reflection. I had held up a mirror and they didn't like what they saw, but neither did I, not entirely. Because beneath the satisfaction of exposing their game, there was something raw and aching, the realization that this wasn't just about them. It was about me, too. About the girl who had walked into their world with an open heart, only to be measured by the width of her wallet instead of the weight of her character. The shift in their perception was immediate, almost violent in its intensity. One day, I was the gold-digging outsider. The next, I was the woman who had outsmarted them at their own game. The call started hesitant at first, then desperate. "We just want to understand you better," his mother said, her voice trembling with a fragility I'd never heard before. His father, the man who had once dismissed my homemade meals as peasant food, now sat across from me at a cafe, his hands clasped like a penitent schoolboy. "We misjudged you," he admitted, and the words tasted like ash in my mouth. Because here's the thing about apologies born from exposure. They're not gifts. They're debts paid only when the ledger is forced open. But resentment is a heavy thing to carry, and I learned quickly that holding on to it would only poison me, not them. So I let myself feel it, the sting of their distrust, the humiliation of their tests, before I chose to set it down. What replaced it wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something quieter, understanding. They had built their lives on the fear that love could be bought, that loyalty was just another transaction. And in their own twisted way, they were trying to protect their son from the same cynicism that had hardened them. That didn't excuse it. But it explained it. Families are strange, aren't they? We wound each other in ways no stranger ever could, and yet we're the only ones who can stitch those wounds shut. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. The performances stopped. His mother sent me a recipe, the one my grandmother used to make when times were truly hard. And his father asked for the first time about my work, my dreams, the things that made me me. It wasn't perfect. There were still sideways glances, still moments when the old suspicions flickered in their eyes like dying embers. But there was also effort. And effort, however clumsy, is the first step toward trust. Here's what I know now. Truth isn't just a weapon, it's a bridge. And walking across it requires courage from both sides. Maybe that's the real lesson in all of this. Not just that people will test you, but that you get to decide what happens after they fail. Do you slam the door, or do you leave it cracked open just enough to let the light in?